Welcome to NEK VT Rocks. Today the show is about an entity called KFIG. Nicole Grattan, Paul Dreyer, Rob Anderson. What is KFIG?
Okay, so KFIG stands for Kingdom Fund Innovation Group, and it's a collaborative organization of the three of us working to support development in the Northeast Kingdom and Newport specifically. We have different projects in mind, and one of our first projects is around transportation here in the Northeast Kingdom.
Which we have very little.
Yes, but we have a very open-ended, very innovative idea set of whatever comes our way or whatever ideas we spark, we can kind of see where they go and where they fit into development and vitality here in the Northeast Kingdom.
Okay. And how is that going to impact on us, and when? Because we have no transportation up here that's accessible to the majority of us.
Well, I think the first piece, the piece that we're talking about, the transportation piece, we have several feelers out in terms of grants potential to do a planning study. The proposal that we're thinking of, the high rail bus train system, we envision it taking a bit of planning to get up and running, and we envision it spanning from the White River Junction up the corridor, the train rail corridor, to as far as North Troy, so impacting all the communities along the way in between here and there.
Right.
So we specifically don't want to introduce an idea or a transportation system or a new transportation system without getting community input and engagement to see how that will impact the variety of communities along the way, including our own.
Right.
So we think of it as, so the first stage is our planning stage, which is I would think approximately a year of planning with engineering, the appropriate architectural pieces, all the different collaboration between agencies, all that sort of stuff, and the community. And then we would look at a pilot implementation project, phase 2, year 2, with the idea of funding the larger project in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I saw a piece in the Newport Daily, which is how come you're all sitting here right now. And my first thought was, wow, what a fantastic idea, because the rail structure is already there and totally neglected, apparently, which makes no sense. But as we have so little, it sort of seemed like, oh, this is so logical. And I'm really curious if you're getting any buy-in already.
I know I've had people come up to me and essentially say, this is a wonderful idea, people I didn't know, and people I did know who, wow, you're doing this, this is, what is this, how's it going on? And they talk about, now after they get beyond saying that it's a good idea, they say, we see the trucks working on the train tracks, and so there's already a precedent for it.
Yeah.
Which there is, and we've come across some interesting video of past attempts at this, and it seems that the problems that were encountered in the past were technological problems which have been solved years ago with the advent of GPS, so you know exactly where everybody is on the line. And one of the advantages of this, which Paul and Nicole touched on, is that by extending the line from White River Junction essentially to North Troy, you re-enfranchise everybody along the way. It's not just Newport, it's you're creating a public transportation system for an area that's been deprived of public transportation since essentially 1965, when the last train rolled out of Newport. So it's going to energize the entire region. Plus Nicole's idea of having hubs and bringing the broadband. So we're creating like each station, like you'd have a station where the bus would pull into, because the bus drives along the tracks, gets off the tracks, goes into a town, stops at a station. Well, those stations would be workplaces, what do you call it? Like
Co-working places.
Co-working places. And each co-working place would be broadband accessible. And broadband up here, because of the mountains, is difficult.
It's non-existent again.
So it provides not only a public transportation vehicle, it also provides meeting places and community engagement places. With Paul's expertise and capacity to put together community engagement, I think we're going to have a really good shot at bringing this together and involving people up and down and changing the isolation. And if you wanted to go to school in Lyndonville, from here you could hop on the train, you could study on your way down, you could go to school, you could study on your way back, or if you need to go to be a vet, you need to go to the VA hospital, you can get on the train, you can go straight down.
Or
you don't have to
Dartmouth
rely.
Hitchcock or...
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Actually really exciting.
The other piece that was in one of our grant proposals is that the rail bed itself could also be the conduit for broadband along that corridor, so that we would be able to deliver broadband service as sort of offshoots of the rail line.
And it would be underground? Or
Yeah, it would be, and that would also provide for the entire journey in either direction broadband accessibility within the vehicle itself. So if you're on your computer headed toward a meeting in St. Johnsbury, you can be working on your computer or whatever your device is if you want to or not, but that broadband accessibility would be available within the unit of transit.
Just as it is from Philadelphia to DC.
Correct.
That's something that we can't even dream of here.
So, and I think that, again, back to the real change of the game for us was when Nicole brought in just the idea of creating these community hubs, which I think, for me, is exciting, because I think that even if you think about Newport, where do we meet as a community that is accessible, that is big enough space to hold a bunch of people, that has broadband access, meetings could happen, artwork could be displayed, and really become a community resource. And I think historically train stations have played that role to some extent, and a place of commerce. That's the other piece that we think, I'm going to call out a name here, but if, say, Lazy Lady wanted to get her cheese down to a place in a purveyor in St. Johnsbury, it could go in the undercarriage of the bus train in a refrigerated compartment and be put in transit down to different locations along the way.
And fruit and veg going to the places that right now are deserts.
Right,
Like
correct.
North Troy. They lost everything when Dollar General opened there, which, fair enough, it provided some other things, but it totally destroyed their access to fresh produce. And that would be possible.
Right. So we don't envision the high rail bus train as solely a passenger vehicle.
Right.
It's a conduit for whatever
Right.
we choose to convey on it. And they're small enough, light enough, and inexpensive enough to run or operate that that depending on what our planning / feasibility study tells us, we can figure out the frequency with which they'll run, and how many we need between certain points and at what times.
When I lived in Philadelphia, we had something called the subway surface cars, which were both trains and buses. So they would go underground into the subway, and then they would come up and sort of go into a hub, although we never called it that, sort of little turnaround, and people would get on and off and then get back on, would go back into the basement again. It sort of sounds similar to that, but used much more creatively. It's not just an A to B.
Right.
It's got so many options.
And one of the other points that Paul's alluded to, by creating this conduit now, this line of transportation that makes it easy to get here, because it's not easy to get here.
True.
Other people will come here. So the hospitality industry will be invigorated or improved. The ancillary functions that go along with that will be improved. And other businesses, because now people will be able to get here, they'll be able to send themselves and their ideas out into that larger matrix.
Right.
And those people will come here. So it has the potential to really help invigorate everybody along the line. So it's really not just Newport, but it's that whole line of
Right.
communication and of interaction.
Have you started talking to any of the other communities?
We have not yet. But that brings up a really amazing point that I think Rob had this kind of, just to give you an idea, we work collaboratively. We sit down and we have meetings and we talk and we flesh out
I've seen
ideas
your
as
office space. I know where it is.
and we anything kind of comes to the table and we all listen to it and the good ideas get put on paper. And Rob had just the idea or the revelation that when you start to connect a corridor that has been historically connected, new things will happen that we can't even imagine. And
Right.
so having a better accessibility between here and Barton, how does that change the economic dynamic of Newport and Barton or Newport and St. Johnsbury? And we don't know what impacts it'll have on the larger system, but we think that we'll see systemic change
Right.
to this corridor that we're talking about. And so we have not spoken to any communities yet. We have had conversations with folks in St. Johnsbury who, at an agency level, who have seemed very interested in what we were doing. But I think that's the next phase for us is starting to schedule and plan out community engagement with the host of communities between here and there. Some make sense to have bigger engagement with, and some we'll have to sort of figure that out as we move forward. But
And I'm just going to say that, yes, we've been talking about like the regional impact of like,
Yeah.
this is the Northeast Kingdom and finally you can get here, but there's this potential to connect to even greater areas. So
Right.
that spine is there, and there is a rail network that goes from St. Johnsbury to Littleton. And what would that look like to reconnect that? Because currently you can leave Boston and be on public transportation
Right.
all the way to Littleton, and then you're done. It's as far as you can get. But what if you could connect to St. Johnsbury and then on to Newport? Or the same
Right.
is true out of Montreal. You can get all the way out of Montreal to Magog, but you can't get from Magog the 20 miles to here.
Right.
So what would it look like if you can start to connect to these greater urban areas and people that are seeking the kind of environment that we provide here?
Right, and an environmentally friendly model. There's a potential for solar
Right.
with this, or who knows what else we'll dream in the future. But it's not just us sitting in our little metal boxes and driving from A to B to C to D.
And it'll take a lot of those metal boxes off the road,
Yeah.
which will have an environmental impact. And Toyota in Japan, in the 2008 or so, started a study or a test program actually, and they are running buses in rural areas of Japan on the train tracks to provide public transportation for rural areas where they can no longer afford to run a train. I mean, I think it's like $7,000 an hour to run a train. No, the bus is going to cost a couple hundred.
Right.
It's a huge difference. And Toyota's also saying that their buses use a quarter of the diesel that a conventional bus uses on the road. And if you think about it, well, the train tracks are relatively straight, they're
Yeah.
relatively evenly graded. It just sort of makes sense. So it has a definite environmental impact. And you get to communicate with all those other people on the bus. It'll be fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
the social impact.
I mean, I've traveled a lot of places in the world using public transportation, and in really rural countries such as India, buses are how you get to anywhere from anywhere. And a lot of them drive around with a gizmo on the roof that was providing Wi-Fi to all of the little villages. So people there had technology that was way in advance of what we can have here, which is crazy.
Right.
And it was a very social experience too. It was very pleasant.
Well, that's I think we've all traveled some, and
Yeah.
we've all had that experience as well. And it again, taking the existing resource, an underutilized rail bed, and Rob's brainchild of the high rail bus thing, and it just seems like a great way to employ that underutilized resource, but also provide what we've all experienced in other communities or other places in the world, which is easy transportation.
Right.
If I have meetings in St. Johnsbury on a regular basis, and unfortunately I have to get in my car,
Every time.
and if I could get on a bus rail and ride to St. Johnsbury, get off at the depot in St. Johnsbury or the hub, walk the block to my meeting, I would be a much happier person.
Exactly. Particularly in our winters.
Right.
And this is a model that would work in winter. I mean, it's not dependent on a nice sunny day.
At one point, we were traveling as a group, and we were in a larger metropolitan area that had sparse or transit system as well. And they did have rail lines running through the community. And it occurred to me while we were standing, waiting to go into a meeting, that this idea is scalable too. It's transferable and scalable. It works here, but it would work in any community that has access to a rail bed. So if we can start to think about the viability of this in this community or this corridor, we can think about how this could impact the Department of Transportation at a statewide scale and then at a national scale, and really think about the larger implications. So I think the Northeast Kingdom, or this part of Vermont, in terms of just my experience, is a great place to test ideas on, because there's sometimes there's resistance, but oftentimes there's not a lot of reason to have a resistance to something like this. And if it can work in this environment that is a bit of a difficult environment, we know that it can probably work in other places.
It has its challenges.
Right. So so I think that while that's not our immediate objective, that's a larger kind of goal of this organization, is to think about how we can have impacts beyond just our community to the larger context of interregional planning efforts and things like that.
In a perfect world, how long would it take from, I don't know how long you've been dreaming this already, probably quite a while, to it actually being implemented? What's a possible time frame?
Part of our proposal is that, as Paul said earlier, spend a year doing the basic research, the basic starting the outreach, and then actually purchasing a bus, having it converted, and putting it on the rails, and taking it from town to town and using it as a model to show people what we're talking about and to engage them in it. And then at the end of the study, and while the study's going on, also start looking into how we go about acquiring this, what grants are available, what funding sources,
who would invest,
who's going to partner with us, exactly.
Yeah.
And also what the jobs, where the hubs are going to be, who's going to staff them. So there's not just the three of us. Once this thing starts to roll out,
it'll have a life of its own.
A lot of people to help us with the study, because you need a lot more than 3 people to do all of this research. And once it rolls out, you're going to need a lot of people to drive the buses, to repair the buses.
Right.
You're going to need space in Newport, obviously, to store them, to fix them, to make new ones. You're going to need people to man the hubs all the way along. So you're going to start creating jobs just in its existence, as well as the jobs that will be created ancillarily because of its existence. So,
I mean, this could take a life of its own so fast.
We do have a business entity, the KFIG entity, which is, for the record, the name Kingdom Fund is a reference to an Opportunity Zone Fund, which is a mechanism for private entities to invest in our community.
Right.
When we set up our fund, our accounting attorney said, "Now, do you envision you owning this high rail bus transit system?" And the answer is absolutely no.
Right.
It takes on a life of its own, and that it's not. It becomes either a public-private entity, or it would, maybe a public entity altogether that V-Trans owns, or there may be people along the way and businesses along the way that decide that they want to invest in it because it's going to provide job force transit for them. And if there's the furniture factory somewhere along the way that, you take built by Newport, which is on the rail line, and if you can get employees from Barton or Lindenville to that location, skilled workers, on our system, the system we're thinking of, that's a huge increase of the workforce or work pool.
Right.
So, and we also know that, or I know, having grown up in Newport, that transportation is tough here for even those of us who have cars. You know, I don't own the best car in the world. It's often on the mend.
Correct.
And so I walk a lot, and if there was other means of transit to get around, it would, I think, increase the job opportunities for everyone within the walking pool of the rail line, which is basically all of Newport.
Right. And a lot of us don't want to drive at night anymore.
Right.
So it would be so much easier. It would be wonderful. You look like you're going to say something.
I was just thinking, you know, it even just helps people who may not have vehicles at all for one reason or another. They can continue to be employed somewhere.
Right.
So if someone were to lose their vehicle, whether that's because of maintenance or something that they did and they lost their license, they could
Right.
continue to be employed someplace because they
Right.
can now get there in another means. And they're not relying on like a taxi that would probably take away their entire pay.
We don't even have taxis most of the time.
Right. So there's that as well.
Yeah. Is your creative energy, 'cause, I mean, as you're talking, there's clearly so much creative energy between the three of you. Is that energy going in other directions as well? For example, Rob and I have talked in the past about the landfill. Have you put any thought into other things that could be really helpful up here and maybe change some of the things that are happening?
Well, I'm just going to say, this person's sitting on one side of me, this person's sitting on the other side of me. What's not on the table?
Yeah.
I think that the way this conversation started was Rob came to me and we started talking about some ideas. Nicole and I were talking about ideas revolving around planning and community development, and we at some point met, and then we began discussing all these issues, potential arts venues, not new ones per se, but the way we reinvigorate our town by readapting or reusing existing places to enhance arts, the arts in our community, housing, where and how that might come into being, even ideas about how do you replan the pit? You know, what does that look like in terms of a planning exercise first, and then community engagement next to see how that planning is received by our community members. Not a kind of top-down, the state thinks we should do this here, but what do we think as a community, and how can we get there from our kind of the community we are as a community, who we are.
Grassroots.
Right.
And around here, sadly, that's such a novel idea. I mean, the discouragement for community involvement is mind-blowing. So anything that's talking about community involvement right from the get-go is yes, bring it on.
So.
And I just think you can do community involvement in many different ways. It doesn't always have to be a public meeting at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Like, we can be going to places as well.
Yes.
So if that means we're going to the senior center during their bingo potluck lunch, we can get a lot of information from that. We can be going into
Absolutely.
schools and talking with students. We can be, you know, at Tim and Doug's opening day and getting a lot of information from people and not necessarily having to have them come to us. I think
Right.
that a big idea that came out of this is that we're going to be seeking you out to get the information that everyone has. And
Yes.
everyone has their own information, and we really need to gather all of that. So that's what I got.
Yeah, I mean, the current buzzword is leadership training. But again, that's promoting a new version of top-down. And a different model is one where people do exactly what you're saying, which is go to the people as opposed to expecting them all to trot towards you to the Tuesday evening meeting. That's great.
I think one of Rob kind of alluded to this, but the idea that the first bus would actually become the kind of moving roadshow down the tracks to also host and just show up in towns and be like, okay, here we are. This is what this looks like. Come out and see it. You know, who knows what would happen in those those moments where we start to have the high rail bus train moving along the tracks and suddenly showing up, and maybe it's during the autumn and there's a autumn dinner or food related, you know,
Traveling gallery.
right, and you could do any number of things to bring people, in this case, out, but we're also bringing the bringing the bus rail system to the communities rather than
Right.
saying, come to Greensboro to have,
Mm-hmm.
to this meeting hall to have this thing, we'd be showing up. And I think that's part of this idea too, that this is asking us and our community to show up, and
Right.
and ways that we don't normally do that, and ways that respects our community as experts in and of itself. None of us are experts here,
No.
really much of anything. Rob's probably the biggest expert at something.
He has some pretty diverse skills. I've seen some of them, but
But I think that the part of the beauty of this group is also that we recognize that as a threesome, as a collaboration, we have some strengths, but we really rely on the input and the engagement from the people around us, that and the community we live in. I mean, the physical entity of the space we live in is so informing to what ideas come to our thoughts and our discussions. You can't ignore where we live in the world on the map at the end of a train line,
right.
with some empty storefronts, an empty building block, and a beautiful lake. Those are all
Right.
those are all physical realities that we take into account when we think about things.
So currently, all of your energy is going into this as the first project, the rail line. Are there any other projects that you're also working actively on that you're willing to talk about yet? Or are they still at the germination stage?
You can go ahead.
Lots of germinating. Again, I just see that there's ways, just even in downtown Newport, if we could help out even some of the small businesses, just do little tweaks of what they already have going on, just to increase their presence and their ability to be there for the community. I just think of like Little G's. Yes, I've heard Domino's is going there, but if we could just keep it a sandwich shop, they're on the lake.
Right.
And if there's a way that as an organization we could facilitate them getting a small grant to put out a deck over the water, I feel like that automatically becomes a better place, not just for people coming in, but for our own community, where you can go and
Absolutely.
have another place to have lunch. Or we have the landing company building that is this beautiful, big open space. And there's been a call for a performance center or something with the arts, and there's a whole organization working around that. So what could we do, even just as KFIG, to help facilitate that? I don't think we're looking to take over that project. There's already energy behind it, but if there's ways to help connect those links, those are some of the projects that we have in mind.
So if somebody currently, say on Main Street, like Little G's or Mac, for example, were to contact you, would you be open to talking with them?
Absolutely. That I don't think we think of ourselves as a money-making entity, so
That's fortunate.
We
I realize you have to eat too, but
I think that part of our self-understanding as a group, and part of our kind of mission statement, is that we would be willing to work with and work for, in the sense of on the behalf of anybody who really, if someone had an idea and and wanted it, some planning expertise or some architectural or
Right.
some building or any of those pieces of things that we can bring to the table, I think we're willing to bring them forth. And while we do have strengths in our organization, planning and architecture and building,
Right.
and some economic understanding, with things like opportunity zones, we want to.
you also have a lot of local knowledge, and that can't be underestimated. And you have resource knowledge,
Correct.
and that's really useful.
So we have, we would love to talk with anybody who would want to talk with us, and we have a number of projects that we are nurturing along on our own, that with actually community members and other organizations and the real estate community and whoever. What we don't want to do is necessarily shoot anything in the foot by stepping on toes before it's
Right.
appropriate.
Absolutely.
We were cautious about the newspaper article that was written, because we didn't want to make it seem like we were working behind anyone's back, because that's not our intention.
Right.
Our intention is to work with our local government, our local agencies, all those
Right. I
different.
mean, I don't know if you have official office space too, but the office space that I see, which is the first table as you walk into Newport Natural, is a really nice way of being able to connect with you. So I haven't seen you there at that particular office space.
I'm there every now and again. Not as frequently as
No,
these
I'm
two.
sure.
We have a slightly more official office space, but that is our preferred. And for the simple reason that we do have engagement with people who
Right.
who walk through, and
You are right on the train track. I mean, talk about being a hub, being your own metaphor. If you go into Newport Natural and certainly into the cafe part, there is no way in or out without passing you guys.
that's where my kids always know where to find me.
Of course.
Daddy's there.
But that's good.
Yeah.
And as you become more visible, and hopefully you're going to become much more visible, I would hope that other people realize that you have this to offer and want to talk.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that they're going to be able to offer you much in terms of payment, and it's fortunate that you're not doing this to make money, but you do have to eat. And clearly your services should come with a price.
Yeah, and that's, I think eventually that would be a goal, but for now there's no end of potential grant funds and that kind of money that can and should be harnessed for this region.
Right.
You know, I've worked in a lot of communities as a planner in Vermont, and I've
Right.
been to ribbon cuttings that the senators have been at in other communities because they've had grant monies awarded to them, and for the simple reason that they tried to get the grant money. You know, not because their project was more deserving than a project here. It was
Right.
that they actually wrote for the grant and were awarded the funds.
Yeah.
I think it's high time for us to really sort of value ourselves as a community that deserves to have the kind of resources that places like Winooski or
Right.
South Burlington or St. Johnsbury and Lindenville have had, or wherever you pick your community, but we need to value ourselves and really
And to say what we want, not just grovel.
Right.
And act like we're grateful for crumbs, because frankly, we deserve more than crumbs.
Absolutely. And I think that's probably the biggest generating, and I think that whenever I first met Rob, that was the thing that he kept coming to me with, like, we can do this. We can start asking for and figuring out how to make this community better with the engagement with the community, but we have to try. And if we don't try, we're not going to get anywhere. You know?
You're absolutely right. If you don't ask, you don't get. And that's the sort of 101 in fundraising. You know, the person teaching the workshop comes in with a $5 note in their hand, and they say, how do you raise money? And the first person who says you ask for it gets the $5, which is a handy-dandy little tool,
Right.
but it has validity. If we don't ask, we don't get.
Exactly.
On that note, we have to end because we're out of time. It goes really fast. We are going to be showing a little video that you brought with you, so that will get attached to this.
Good.
And will you come back and do a follow-up?
Sure.
Not next week, but you know.
Of course.
Yes.
Thank you. As the progress happens, and it will.
Yeah, that
Thank
helps
you for
keep people
coming.
involved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Riding the rails isn't what it used to be. For a new convertible motor bus that runs just as well over railroad rails as it does over the highway has been put into service here. Leaving the city, the driver very easily flips some convenient levers. Down come a pair of small guide wheels, both in the front and at the rear. They're locked in place. A complete change from road to rail in less than 1 minute, and we're off down the steel highway, out of traffic and with no more stoplights to watch. Rubber tires on shiny steel rails. Perfect riding comfort at all speeds. Not a bump in a carload. Rubber tires grip the wheels better. No slipping, no skidding. Watch out for those cars. No chance for an accident when we can stop like that. It's expecting a lot to think that a train will stop at a crossing, but this new rail bus can do it. The miles fly by in a hurry, and here's the highway again. Miles saved by the rail shortcut. Up come the guide wheels. We're back on the highway again without even a stop. Right down to the center of the village, where we leave passengers and pick up packages for the city. The compartment at the rear is large enough for express, in addition to passengers' baggage. All aboard?